Okay, part 18, everybody. The prologue, and apparently this is from Charlotte's point of view. Charlotte's curls bounced as she stepped onto the teleportation portal with her head attendant, Vanessa, beside her. She was heading to the Royal Academy for the first time. The thought alone made her heart pound with excitement and anxiety. Farewell, Lady Charlotte. May you enjoy the Royal Academy. One by one, her adult retainers saw her off with a smile, starting with Ernesta. Her parents, in contrast, gave her a list of warnings with uneasy and concerned expressions. Listen up, Charlotte, Sylvester said. I need as many eyes in the Royal Academy as possible to make sure the intel we're receiving is accurate. I've already given the same order to Wilfried and Rosemine, but I want you to send me daily reports of what you've learned, of what you've seen, what you've heard, and what you've done in your classes. Yes, Father. As you have noticed, you cannot trust Rosemine in social situations, Florencia added. Not only was she raised in the temple, but she continues to spend much time there, and circumstances mean she has 2 fewer years of education than anyone else. There are many who will wish to socialize with the girl who was the source of all of our trends, but those of other duchies will not properly grasp her situation. I realize this is quite the burden for you to accept in your first year, but please support her as best you can as a fellow female Archduke candidate. Charlotte realized that her parents' concerns were more about how she would support her older brother and sister than anything else. Her chance to become the next Ob was gone owing to Wilfried and Rosemine's engagement, and now, rather than honing her own talents, she was expected to focus on aiding her 2 siblings. She understood that it was necessary for the future of Ehrenfest, but as an Archduke candidate herself, she couldn't help but feel unsatisfied. Still, this is my opportunity to repay my sister. Charlotte could still see flashes of the time she had been kidnapped, when Rosemine had to bravely come to her rescue. That incident was the reason for Rosemine's 2-year slumber, and yet she had not said a word of reproach to Charlotte regarding her loss. In fact, much the opposite. She was going to great lengths to make her younger sister's life easier. Charlotte wanted even the smallest opportunity to repay her debt of gratitude. I will strive to be of use to my sister, Charlotte replied with the best smile she could manage. And with that, she teleported to the Royal Academy. Sorry if I'm kind of pausing at stuff. My vision's a little bit blurry right now, so it's kind of harder to read. Which sucks. Welcome back, Lady Charlotte, Vanessa said upon her lady's return to her dormitory room. How was your first fellowship gathering? You were quite nervous before you left. My dear sister helped soothe my worries, Charlotte replied with a faint smile and shake of her head. The very thought of relying on her older sister had overwritten her previous feelings of anxiety. After all, there was nothing to be more anxious about than what Rosemine might do without someone keeping tabs on her. I am glad to hear it, Vanessa said. Now then, let us write our report on the gathering. Charlotte headed to her work desk with Marianne, a scholar apprentice who picked up a board and a pen. So, Lady Charlotte, what about the fellowship gathering was new to you? Or left a particular impression on you, she asked. I was surprised that sovereign food does not taste as good as what we serve at Ehrenfest, Charlotte replied. She had expected dishes prepared by the sovereignty, dishes that were enjoyed by royalty, to be unlike any she had ever eaten before. Of course, the food served was still nice. It simply did not live up to my expectations from when I was younger, when father and mother sang its praises upon returning from the Archduke conference. Marianne began to giggle, as did Charlotte's other retainers. Charlotte's childish disappointment was clear to see, despite her best efforts to disguise it. That would be because Ehrenfest food has changed dramatically since the adoption of Lady Rosemine's recipes, Marianne explained. In the past, sovereign food truly did taste better. You may not have noticed, since the food available here in the dormitory is the same as that served in the castle, but there are few who are fortunate enough to enjoy Lady Rosemine's recipes on a daily basis, even in the nobles' quarter, Natalie remarked. I can assure you that the night dorm are not afforded such a privilege. It was only then that Charlotte realized how blessed she was. She had only been only 5 years old when Rosemine was baptized, so she had very little recollection of the food previously served in Ehrenfest. Lady Charlotte, how did the Archduke candidates of other duchies seem to you? The apprentice attendant Catherine asked, bringing the conversation back on track. Charlotte recalled her experience during the greetings. The other duchies were focused on my sister, as expected. I could feel their eyes being drawn to our hairpins and Ren-Sham-washed hair. Of course, of more importance, however, is the fact that the royal present was already familiar with Rosemine. He knew her name due to her coming first in class last year. I could feel the other Archduke candidates taking more interest in her than in my brother. The other Archduke candidates had celebrated Wilfrid and Rosemine's engagement, but Charlotte could not help feeling that few actually meant their words. I suppose it is only natural that she would receive such attention, Charlotte mused. To think she gave a hairpin to every single female student, I could hardly believe it. Herself capable enough to pick hairpins that would complement the girls' hair colors, but being able to afford them within a tightly allotted budget was a different beast entirely. I would have liked for her to speak to you about this, Lady Charlotte, as she had done with the printing industry, Marianne said with a distinctly dissatisfied tone. If she had sought your assistance, you could have divided the cost equally. It would have given everyone the impression that you were contributing to the trends. Charlotte narrowed her indigo eyes into a harsh glare. Marianne, Rosamine thought of these trends herself and spread them on her own. Were you not displeased when Oswald asked us to credit Wilfrid for our own accomplishments? How could we ask Rosamine to do the same for us? My apologies. I am aware that the Ob advised Lord Wilfrid in the spreading of trends, so I was just feeling a little vexed. I must admit I share your frustration, Charlotte replied, feeling somewhat bitter herself. I understand the importance of propping up Wilfrid now that his engagement has secured his second ascension, but I feel sad. Father is already treating me as someone who will inevitably be leaving Ehrenfest, she said, slumping her shoulders. Vanessa stroked Charlotte's shoulder. Over half a year has passed since the engagement was announced, but there are still many loud voices calling for Lady Rosamine to become the next Ob. I imagine Ob Ehrenfest is desperate to improve Lord Wilfrid's reputation and restrain the Lies gangs in any way he can. She paused for a moment and thought, if you are that displeased, perhaps you could add some particularly sharp words to your report? I am certain the Ob will be thrown into a panic and apologize at once, she joked. Charlotte considered that explanation extremely likely. It came as no surprise that Sylvester was focused on making Wilfrid seem less mediocre in comparison to Rosamine. He just hadn't realized how that was making Charlotte feel. Father has always been dense when it comes to the thoughts and feelings of others, Charlotte thought. Sylvester tended to assume that when he believed in a cause, others would do the same as a matter of course. Lady Charlotte, what shall we write? Marianne asked. Should we fill in the boards with unhappy complaints, or shall we speak of the cooking? Perhaps we should mention how the other duchies responded to the hairpins and Rinsham. Oh, Marianne, Charlotte said with a giggle, feeling her mood brighten in an instant. Father and Mother attended the Archduke conference. They must already know about the inferiority of sovereign food, and Mother would have seen how the duchess reacted to her hairpins and Rinsham. There's no need for me to report my dissatisfaction either. Let us discuss the third prince as is most natural. I believe Lord Wilfrid and Lady Rosamine will be sending identical reports on the matter, Marianne replied. I recognize that they will understand the nuances of the Archduke candidates from other duchies better than I, but Father wished to hear our distinct opinions on matters. Charlotte said, disappointed that she had no exclusive information to report. I would like to send Mother a separate letter, wherein I consult her on how to deal with certain social situations. What manner of questions do you wish to ask? Marianne probed. Is our knowledge unsatisfactory? No, it's just that getting a different opinion from someone who can actually socialize, unlike the attendants and retainers. I mean, she wants extra opinions. Hello? Tarn memorized the political circumstances she learned from her retainers and greeted the representatives from other duchies, making sure to smile at the other first-year Archduke candidates to facilitate their socializing during lessons. She was helped greatly by tips from her older brother and sister, and she hoped to use her unique position as a first year to gather information that they did not know. Not in the least. You have all gathered valuable intelligence from me, Charlotte replied. I do not consider the fellowship gathering to have been a failure. It's just, embarrassingly enough, I found myself a little uncomfortable around Lady Detlinde, who so closely resembled grandmother. Charlotte had first seen Detlinde during the wedding held at the border gate. She had seemed quite friendly with Wilfrid, but she had given only the barest of greetings to so many others, which reminded Charlotte of the way her grandmother Veronica behaved. It was perhaps due to this association that Charlotte's entire body had tensed up upon meeting Detlinde, despite the friendly smile she was received with. I know that I must learn from my sister's universal compassion and treat Lady Detlinde as an individual, and I know that she is not my grandmother, Charlotte continued, but even so, the feelings remain. Please do consult Lady Florencia, then. She spent many long years with Lady Veronica. She will know what to do, Vanessa said, stroking her lady's back once again. She knew how Veronica had treated Florencia and Charlotte all too well. Charlotte nodded to Vanessa, and as they wrote the report, an ordonnance flew into the room. See? Lord Ignace has sent a message of encouragement, Marianne said as the white bird landed on her arm. As expected, the ordonnance was from Ignace, Wolfried's apprentice scholar. He was asking who would be compiling and sending the reports. It seemed that both he and Rosamund's apprentice scholar, Hartmut, had already finished theirs. I shall gather and send them, Marianne said. Give me just a moment to retrieve them. She sent the ordonnance off and momentarily exited the room. It had become her regular job to meet the two boys at the landing of the stairs to retrieve their reports. Charlotte and the others were not yet used to writing reports, so they ended up finishing last. My apologies for the wait, Lady Charlotte, Marianne said. She had returned with several more boards than usual today. What did my brother and sister speak about in their reports? Charlotte asked. The third prince, as expected. Marianne proffered Charlotte the board so that she could see what was written on them. It was decided that the third prince would stay in the Royal Academy before his debut as the Archduke Conference. He was baptized just recently in the autumn. The third prince is the son of the king's third wife from Dunkelfelder. He was raised to be a vassal to the king's successor, and due to his young age, he seems to have very little experience socializing with others. Such were the reports from Ignace and Hartmut, respectfully. Despite both being about the third prince, the latter was far more detailed. Charlotte and Marianne had written only as much as Ignace, so they and all of Charlotte's other retainers bunched together to examine Hartmut's report with widened eyes. Where in the world did Hartmut learn this? Marianne asked. I am told that Lady Rosamund's socializing is quite intense. I would assume it's only natural for someone socializing with top-ranking duchies to have easier access to such information, Catherine replied. But those serving Lord Wolfried also socialized with top-ranking duchies. To my understanding, he spent much time with Lord Ortwin of Drewonkel. Perhaps it comes down to their apprentice scholars, namely their talent for obtaining information from other duchies, Natalie suggested. Oh, probably, because Hartmut's on another level. As one could guess from Charlotte's balking retainers, comparing the reports of two apprentice scholars was enough to determine the standing and skill of those they served. Rosamund had created trends all on her own, spread them with her retainers, and managed to develop a social relationship with royalty and top-ranking duchies that Ehrenfest had otherwise lacked. Rosamund's success was so great, in fact, that several duchies had actively negotiated trade agreements with Ehrenfest during the Archduke Conference. Goosebumps formed on Charlotte's skin as she realized just how much she paled in comparison to her sister. My sister formed connections so well as a first year, even though she had just awoken from a 2-year slumber and spent a crucial period of socializing back in Ehrenfest helping with a dedication ritual. Charlotte whispered to herself. It was easy to forget with how much Sylvester Florenzi and the others had asked Charlotte to provide her assistance, but Rosamund's unusual socializing methods were really quite effective. I am unlikely to encounter any problems with socializing here in the academy, but that is because my brother and sister have already paved the way for me. Take care not to mistake that for our own accomplishments. We could never have associated with royalty without their assistance. Of course, I will still strive to do my best, such that Rosamund does not feel ashamed to introduce me as her sister. Charlotte's retainers all turned their attention back to their lady. We will take care not to grow arrogant, one noted. Please keep in mind, however, that we are not yet experienced enough to meet with royalty on a whim. If you intend to socialize with them, just let us know ahead of time so that we may lay the necessary groundwork. Charlotte nodded at her retainers and praised them in her mind. Socializing between nobles was possible only due to the valiant efforts of those who served them. To prove I am worthy of the faith and service that you all show me, I must strive to stand proudly beside my older brother and sister. To this end, I suppose I must ensure that every single first year passes their exams on the first day. Again with this? Now Charlotte's doing it. So they can't just get mad at Rosamund on this one. Charlotte looked at the pile of textbooks she had received from Rosamund and gave a heavy sigh. Having such a daunting task as her first duty seemed unreasonable, to say the least. Rosamund stacking the books was eerily similar to Ferdinand stacking boards one after another and saying, "Surely you can handle this much." They both had a tendency to assign work that pushed the recipient just a bit further than their perceived limit. Like teacher, like student. Oh, definitely. And she probably doesn't even realize she's doing it. Once we finish our report, I must begin my studies, Charlotte declared, trying to pump herself up. Marianne rested a hand gently on her shoulder. Lady Charlotte, you need only do the best you can. The first years were in a truly miserable state last year after Lady Rosamund forced such an excessive workload upon them. Please do not try so hard that you repeat her mistake and bring suffering to others. Classes. It was the day after the fellowship gathering, and classes were due to begin. The students in the Ehrenfest dormitory had eaten breakfast, making sure to squeeze in a few extra moments of studying whenever they could, and were now preparing for their first lesson. The victory conditions for the Better Grades Committee were the same as last year, either having everyone in your team pass their classes the fastest or produce the most honor students. The new students balked when they saw their seniors working so hard from the very first day and rushed to open up their textbooks as well. Charlotte was doing her best to lead them, but she had no prior experience with the dormitory, meaning she was one step behind them. I passed a letter to Riarda while keeping a watchful eye on my surroundings. Deliver this meeting request to Professor Solange while I'm attending my morning lessons, I said. We will need to register the first years at the library. I understood, milady. I was skimming some notes I had written to help me remember some particularly important details when I noticed Charlotte looking at me with puffed-out cheeks. You certainly are moving at your leisure, sister, she said. Of course, I replied. I was afforded an entire year to prepare, after all. And while I understand that you and the other first years are bemoaning over what little time you had to make your own preparations, I think you are forgetting that you spent this winter and the last studying history and geography in the playroom, and that you have generously been given my textbooks. Last year, the Better Grades Committee wasn't established until after our arrival at the Royal Academy, so the first years were forced to adapt almost overnight. You have it much easier than we do. They do. The lay nobles and men nobles second years nodded, having struggled a great deal with history and geography at the time. They had looked like death itself, but this year they looked healthy and fine as they prepared for class. Incidentally, my target for the second years was for everyone to pass in one go and with the highest possible marks. It's about time, Riarda announced. Everyone moved to the entrance hall. Everyone put away their study materials and gathered in the entrance hall with confident yet also somewhat serious expressions. Or anxious expressions. We needed to be ready in time for 2:30 bell when our morning classes began. After checking that the first years were wearing their brooches and capes, we told them what to be aware of and then exited the dormitory. First and second years went to the central building, while third years and above went to the building for their respective courses. These first years were going to have practical lessons in the morning and then written lessons in the afternoon, while we second years were going to have written lessons in the morning and practical lessons in the afternoon, so it swapped. Okay. Much like the year before. This morning we were focusing on history and law. This will be your first practical lesson then, I said to Charlotte. I hope that you're able to wield mana without issue. Indeed, Charlotte replied. You and Wilfrid are aiming for everyone to pass their written lessons on the first day, correct? I look forward to hearing reports on your success. I gave a firm nod in response and then headed to the auditorium with the other second years. You must not leave until we come to get you, our retainers stressed before going on their way. Once they were gone, we looked for the seats designated for Ehrenfest, that is, the ones labeled 10. Distinguishing them was very easy indeed, since the desks and chairs were separated into duchies. Lady Rosemine, Lord Wilfrid, how do you do, came a familiar, young, and gentle voice as students in the other duchies started to gather. It was Hannelore. I turned around and saw that she was standing in front of the other blue-caped Dunkelfugger students. Rather than her guiding them, it seemed more like they were her stalwart defenders. Good, Lady Hannelore, I replied. I trust you are just as well. Are you and the other Ehrenfest students once again aiming to pass all your classes on the first day, she asked with a soft smile, as if she found the sight of us desperately reading our notes heartwarming. It was quite a surprise when you accomplished it last year. Wilfrid replied that we hope to accomplish the same again. Much to our embarrassment during the awards ceremony last year, we were praised for our speed but criticized for our low grades, I admitted with a smile. Although we still intend to pass on the first day, our goal for this year is to improve our efforts and achieve high grades that we can take pride in. Hannelore looked at me and the other Ehrenfest students with wide eyes, as did the Dunkelfegger students accompanying her. I suppose that if anyone can perform such a feat, Lady Rosemine, it is you, she said. I look forward to hearing of your duchy's exploits this year. Lady Hannelore is expecting great things from me. As a fellow library committee member, I need to secure grades that won't disappoint her. I steeled my resolve to achieve grades befitting of a library committee member, at which point my motivation shot up to a level that was entirely unprecedented. I will strive to meet your expectations, Lady Hannelore, I said. I shall also pray for Dunkelfelder to find just as much success this year. I thank you ever so much, Lady Rosemine. After watching the platoon of blue capes head to their seats, I returned my focus to my notepad of weaknesses. Our first class was history, which was going to be more complex and in-depth than what we had studied the year before. There was a lot to memorize, but most of the information we was just building upon things we had already learned, so it wasn't that bad. First and second years were taught the general flow of history, while third years and above learned about particular figures and their achievements depending on their course. I'm so nervous I was the only one who barely passed history last year, Feline muttered while preparing her writing utensils, no doubt remembering what the teacher had said to her last year. You've got nothing to worry about, I tried to reassure her. You studied as well as anyone. Isn't that right, Wilfrid? Don't talk to me right now, Rosemine. It feels like the names of all these kings are going to spill out of my ears at any moment. They certainly are long and similar sounding, I agreed. The years in this world weren't numbered. Instead, Jürgen Schmidt's history was neatly delineated into eras based on the reigns of different kings, with the King X era being followed by the King Y era, for example. As I continued memorizing them all, it occurred to me that the system was quite similar to how periods were represented in Japanese history. The names were harder to memorize, but not having to remember numbers made up for that. You just needed to get the general flow down. Now, one student from each duchy come forward to fetch the exam papers. Feline collected the papers as our representative, then handed them out. This was always the most exhilarating moment of school, in my opinion. It made me feel like a hero of legend, brandishing my sword and preparing to fight any valiant foe who would dare challenge me. Although, when I'm not so confident about passing, it feels more like I'm pleading for my life. This was a test I was confident about, so I finished it in the blink of an eye. It seemed that everyone else from Ehrenfest found it equally trivial. Feline and Roderick in particular looked a lot more at ease than they had the year before, which is good. Done, Feline eventually announced after staring down at her test with a deadly serious expression. She was the last Ehrenfest student to finish, so we turned in our papers and started studying for the next exam while the professor graded us. It was while we were studying law that an announcement echoed through the auditorium. All passing grades for Ehrenfest. We glanced up from our notes and exchanged celebratory looks. The girls smiled at one another while the boys traded more self-assured grins. Some of the duchies received a 100% pass rate as well, but Ehrenfest came in first. Hopefully we could keep it up and pass our next one together too. Now on to law. History hadn't been a walk in the park for me, but law was another story entirely. Here, memorizing the content wasn't enough. One needed to understand it as well. Laws applied to all nobles in Jurgensmith, including royalty, and were recorded in what was apparently titled the Book of Laws. We were studying from transcribed copies, while the original was a magic tool in the sovereignty. The laws were focused almost entirely on interactions between duchies and things that applied on a countrywide scale, such as the appropriate process for marrying into another duchy, or how successors were decided upon. One thing that stood out to me was how detailed the instructions were for when an archduke passed away without settling on a successor. On the whole, the country's laws were pretty ambiguous and crudely written. A lot of sections said nothing more than the king will arbitrate, or a decision shall be made during the archduke conference. There had been more than enough times when I wanted to cry out that the laws provided no real guidance, that there was no purpose in them even existing. Did anyone here even understand the point of having them? According to Ferdinand, it was exceedingly difficult to expunge outdated rules once they were added to the Book of Laws. Many were kept vague on purpose as a way to future-proof them. In the past, there was a king who took issue with how many incidents depended on his arbitration. He introduced one detailed law after another to reduce how often he was consulted on legal matters, which worked well for his time, but as future generations came and went, and the country became more modern, these laws became outdated. Still, the people had to follow them. The king of a new generation had wanted nothing more than to eradicate the laws, but there were many nobles who wanted to keep them as a matter of tradition. Thus began an unending dispute. Decades passed in the state, and every spat among duchies resulted in calls to nullify what some considered to be archaic laws. It wasn't long before the yearly inter-archduke conference descended into a state of what could only be called utter chaos. In the end, it was collectively agreed that the laws were best kept ambiguous. Any excessively detailed rules were removed, and individual problems were instead dealt with through discussion. Ever since then, those who called for more detailed laws were mocked as having been charmed by the goddess of chaos. I had wondered why the rules weren't unchanged during such a prolonged period of time, or chaos. Surely it was better to change them if discord was expected to continue either way. But rewriting laws was more complicated than I realized. As it turned out, the process took an exceedingly long time, and it was a lot of work for the king to determine which sections to keep and to remove. And after so much debate, what they ended up with were these unclear as heck laws. During a conversation with Ferdinand, I had muttered that having such vague laws only made the resolving of disputes a more drawn-out process. In response, he had muttered that having less restrictive rules was more convenient for those in power. It was a fair point indeed. It was hard to understand why the laws existed at all, but their ambiguity at least made them easier to remember. I just needed to memorize the universal rules, which would absolutely never change, rules that allow for some leeway depending on the king's judgment, rules that were decided in discussions between archdukes, and rules that archdukes could decide on their own. Compared to all the library and patent laws I had to learn in college books back in my Arano days, however, this is a piece of cake. Everyone turned in their papers, and we began studying for tomorrow's classes. As we awaited to receive our grades, I noticed that the professors had started arguing at the front. One of the proctors, Frau Alarm, was calling it suspicious that we had all finished so quickly and with such high scores, while the other professors chastised her, saying there was nothing suspicious about it at all. Despite us having turned in our papers first, the second and third duchies to finish received their passing grades before us. While we were made to wait, the tension must have started getting to the others. Feline couldn't help but let out a quiet whimper. Lady Rosamine, Lord Wilfrid, we're going to be fine, Feline, Wilfrid said. We know for a fact we haven't cheated. Hold your head high and be patient. You and the others worked hard for an entire year. It's only natural that you'd achieve high grades, I added. And no sooner had the words left my mouth than a voice rang through the auditorium. All passing grades for Ehrenfest. It had taken the professors some time to reach an agreement, but we had all passed, and we could tell from Frau Alarm's shrieks that we had done so with aplomb. Nice. Too bad she tried to mess with y'all. Frickin' bitch. Our actual grades were usually kept from us, so it was nice to know that we had all done so well. We put away our things and rose from our seats, ready to return to the dormitory. Before we could, however, a group of emerald green capes from Jeronko stepped in front of us. Seems like you guys are having another good year, Wilfrid. Ortwin, I appreciate the compliment, but I could say the same about Jeronko. I took a step back and watched as Wilfrid and Ortwin nobly extolled each other's victories. Everyone in Ortwin's group looked pretty smart, but maybe that was just because I knew Jeronko was a duchy known for producing highly skilled scholars in droves. Jeronko has taken first place in overall grades for about 20 consecutive years, Ortwin said with a confident grin. Your grades might be getting better, Ehrenfest, but we won't lose that easily. Oh, they don't just look smart, they actually are smart, I thought. I was pretty sure that the only way to maintain top overall grades was for the duchy students to unite as one and all study together. Lord Ortwin really must be going now, one of the Green Capes said. Ah, indeed, Wilfrid, let's both keep up the good work, Ortwin said, snapping back to reality. He flourished his emerald green cape and then exited the auditorium, taking the Jeronko crowd with him. It's nice having a rival to compete against, Wilfrid said with a contented grin as he watched them go. He then swung his ochre cape in a similar flourish and followed them out. We headed back to the dormitory for lunch to find that a section of the older apprentice knights and apprentice scholars had already returned. It seemed that the years with written lessons had all successfully passed on their first day. Nice! Written lessons certainly were easy this year. Indeed, our victory over the knights is all but guaranteed. I was overjoyed to hear that as a member of the Better Grades Committee. I had to admit it was impressive just how competitive people were when it came to our team-based contests. I have delivered your letter to Professor Solange, milady. She was surprised to receive it. This is the first time someone has ever requested a meeting on the same day the classes began. We may go and register the first years at noon the day after tomorrow. Can we use that time to change Schwartz and Weiss's clothes, I wonder? As far as I was concerned, the sooner we could dress them in their new outfits, the better. Riarda fell into thought for a moment. We must inform Professor Herscher of when we will be changing their clothes, she said, and Professor Solange is going to be busy registering the first years. Not to mention, I do not believe you will have enough time to do all this during your noon break. I will recommend that you focus on registering the first years and supplying the tools with mana for now. You can change their clothes when everyone has more time in their schedule. She had a point. There was no need for me to rush changing their clothes, so I decided to settle for supplying them with some mana for the time being. After an enthusiastic lunch spent chatting about our test results, we saw off Charlotte and the other first years, calling out words of encouragement as they went to do their exams. We then headed out ourselves, ready to attend our practical lessons. They were held in different classrooms depending on status, so my group dropped in number dramatically. Hey everyone, Wilfrid said with a smile as he greeted the Archduke candidates and archnobles from other duchies. We was rejoicing over their reunion and enthusiastic about their spending another school period together, which made me realize just how behind I was when it came to socializing. I had finished all my classes in one go, only showed up a single time, so I couldn't remember their names or faces. In truth, they probably didn't remember me either. I know I should probably socialize more, but if my choice is between that and the library, yeah. Once again, I was forbidden from entering the library until after I passed all my classes, but that was temporary. If you asked me to choose between the library and socializing with other students, I would pick the library every time. I'm the bookworm who raised in the library, while Wilfrid is the popular guy with lots of friends. It's the perfect way to divide our duties if you ask me. We're both playing to our strengths. Not to mention, it wasn't as though I hadn't avoided socializing entirely. I had a wonderful friend named Hannelore. My most important duty was deepening my bond with her and making more bookworm friends. I made one bookworm friend in my first year, so hopefully I can make 2 bookworm friends in my second. As I was plotting out how to make more friends this year, 4 professors entered the room. Herscher, Fraularm, Primavera, and Roffin. Oh no, Fraularm. I don't like her. I don't get what the heck her deal is with Ehrenfest and Rosamine in particular. Today we are going to be reviewing topics covered in your first year, such as handling high beasts, transforming staffs, and casting rot, Herscher announced. One cannot properly learn new techniques without first mastering the old. Now then, take out your high beast, Frolin called. We all did as we instructed, and the small hall became twice as cramped in an instant. The speed at which students produced their high beasts indicated how much practice they had. Some produced theirs instantly, while others needed a little more time to properly form the shape. Leslie still stood out a little, but there were several other girls who now had similar-looking drivable high beasts. They wasted no time climbing inside. Of the drivable high beasts, most were shoe mills, likely because that was what Hersher had produced during her initial demonstration, and they all used reins instead of steering wheels. Finished, Hannelore said with a short exhale. Her high beast was a drivable shoe mill, too. Nice! It was fairly small since it was sized to accommodate just her, and its face was very cute. No doubt she loved shoe mills to death. Lady Hannelore would probably get along with Lazletta. Passionate about shoe mills, and they both looked perfect wearing cute accessories. There wasn't a doubt in my mind that Lady Hannelore had a talent for embroidery and sewing. Once the professors had confirmed that everyone had made their high beasts, they moved on to having some of our staffs. Roffin stood in front while the other professors stayed back and kept a close eye on us. All right, take out your staffs, he called. His booming voice echoed throughout the small hall, and everyone promptly did as they were told. Holy cow, talk about a lot of crests. I had assumed that only Wolfried made a crest-decorated staff to gush about, but it seemed that they were in fashion among the boys. Some had the crest stuck out onto their wand-shaped staff like stickers, while others like Wolfried had them physically engraved. Why so surprised, Rosamund? Wolfried asked. You look like you've seen something funny. I simply did not expect staffs with crests to be so popular, I replied. Actually, I'm the one who started the trend, Wolfried noted as he proudly waved his lion-hilted staff. Makes sense that you don't know, considering how fast you finished your classes. I kind of guessed that Wolfried would start a trend of sorts with his over-the-top staff, but I had never expected his influence to be this great. Not many girls seemed to have crests, I observed. Yeah, some wanted them, but Lady Hannelore said it wasn't a wise idea. You can't really blame her. We're all Archduke candidates and archnobles, so most of the girls here are going to be marrying out of their duchies. They could always use subtle and more personal symbols instead. Back in Japan, there had been maternal symbols passed down from mother to daughter, even when they were wedded to other families and had their last name changed. I was sure the girls here could use such symbols on their staff as long as they made it clear they were maternal tradition or some sort. Not that I really care, I have no intention of using one myself. Perhaps I could advise Charlotte a maternal symbol so that she could teach the concept to any first-year girls who wanted a crest on their staff. Once you have formed your staffs, practice morphing them, Roffin continued. If you can't do this, you can't brew Messer. Everyone repeated the chant to morph their staffs, and then said Rucken to revert them back to their original shapes. We then said Stylo to make a pen, and Bayman to make a mixing stick. The process took some longer than others, but we all managed it successfully. All right, last step, the emergency signal. Rot, Roffin shouted. Everyone fired red lights out of their staffs at his command. I can understand the necessity of learning to morph one's staff early, since it was necessary for brewing practices, but I still found it weird that we were taught rot before almost anything else. Because, emergency signals aren't something that average person needs that often, right? If you guys are getting attacked or anything, it'd be best to have it. I thought that one could just carry a magic tool with them for shooting out warning signals, but Ferdinand had casually answered that mystery for me with a single line. Without everyone knowing rot, treasure-stealing dinner would be even more dangerous than it already is. It was something that I hadn't really considered, since it was only recently that treasure-stealing dinner had stopped being played, and students were now obtaining their staffs during their first year. Rot had been much more necessary during the era when one received their staff in their third year. After starting a specialized course, and apprentice scholars participated in dinner games alongside the apprentice knights to make and activate magic tools. I suppose treasure-stealing dinner is just that dangerous. It can be, yeah. Good, Roffin said. Seems like you've all been practicing. We can move on to the next step now. He looked over the gathered students with a smile of satisfaction, at which point Hersher leisurely walked to the front. She could be taking the lead from here. We will now study the fundamentals of brewing. As second years, you will need to craft rejuvenation potions, ordinances, and face stones for proposing to someone. Those will all prove necessary for your lives going forward, she said. It seemed that the more specialized practical lessons awaited us in our third year and beyond, requiring enough mana that we would need potions for each class. We were the ones who would suffer if we didn't at least learn to make them on our own. Ordinances were likewise necessary for nobles to speak to one another. Those who only had one would find themselves unable to contact anyone else until they received a response, so it was necessary to carry several normal to carry several at all times. Then there was the engagement face stones. It was necessary for the man and woman who wished to get married, to give their stones to one another, and those who were unable to make them simply couldn't propose at all. Our focus for today is simply learning how to make engagement face stones, so you are going to be working with low-quality face stones. They are going to be of no value whatsoever, despite your conception of what a proposal face stone should be. When it comes time for you to actually propose, you will want to make one out of the highest quality face stone you can acquire by your own means. Hersher said, her smile widening as she spoke. Some may think it's too early for you all to be learning this, but they are also convenient for forming more casual relationships and requesting escorts for the graduation ceremony. I know of one fine young man who gifted the face stone he made here to his young sweetheart against his parents' approval. After all, it was a mere practice face stone, and that one for a true proposal. Oh yeah, I think I remember a scene like that in the Royal Academy love stories, which Mother wrote. As I recalled the contents of the book, I saw the girls above me listening to the tale of romance with sparkling eyes and clasped hands. It was amusing to see that the boys barely reacting in comparison. Well, of course not. Seems like Mother's romance stories know their demographic well. Hello, future customers. The ingredients that Hersher had prepared were lined up in front of us, and we were told to collect our own from the gathering spot near our dormitory. We will be brewing a rejuvenation potion during our next lesson, Hersher said. Take care not to forget your ingredients. Okay, I'm going to have to end it off here, and I'll see you guys in the next one.